Now what we're going to do is take a look at the 10 artillery shells that I found in one day. I had just posted the video maybe a week ago, 10 artillery shells in one day or something really original like that, I think is what I called it. But anyway, they're on a table behind me. Let's take a quick look at them. I'll show you how they cleaned up and how they worked, and hopefully that'll answer some of the questions that you guys have been asking me. Take a look. This is what they look like all cleaned up. I was able to save the wood fuses out of them. Now these are fuses, F-U-Z-E. You can also, spell fuse F-U-S-E. Now with the S is typically a fuse like you'd have in your house, in the fuse box. A fuse with a Z is typically a fuse that would be in an artillery shell. Now, there is actually a little bit more to it, and these could possibly be spelled with an S. But that's a long story, and that's a whole nother video. If you want to know about that, I'll tell you later. Anyway, these are the 10 shells that I found. I got them all cleaned up. Like I said, they're not perfect, and they're not quite as smooth as I was hoping they were going to be. But the reason for that is these are late war shells manufactured by the Confederacy, so they didn't have really good stuff. I mean, the iron they were using was inferior. So if you look at this shell here, you can see there's actually holes in the iron. These little itty bitty holes. That makes it very weak and prone to exploding before they're supposed to explode. And that was a problem with the Confederacy, especially late in the war. So you'll see a lot more pitting on these types of shells. Let me show you this one real quick. So one question a lot of you guys have asked me is, how do you know that it's fired or dropped? These are obviously dropped, but how can you tell? Well, this is how you can tell. If you look here, this brass band, this is called a sabot. Now I say sabot in some of my videos because that's how everyone pronounces it, but it's actually pronounced sabot, like the French. And it's the same way with the mini ball. Everyone says mini ball for the standard Civil War bullet, but it's actually a minet ball. But, most people just say sabot. I'll say sabot for now on because people have been really ragging me about it. And this is how you can tell if it's been fired or not. You see the sabot on this is nice and smooth. And this shell over here that was fired, you can see it's all rough and misshapen. In fact, you can see these little slots right here are actually the marks from the rifling in the cannon tube. That's how you can tell the difference. By looking at this here, and it's very smooth, I know it was dropped. I'm going to show you something on the bottom that's kind of interesting. If you look here right in the center, this is called a Lathe Dimple. That's actually where they would put this on a lathe or a big machine, and it would be like this, and the thing would spin, and the worker would use like a chisel, and it would spin around, and they'd shave off the iron right here to make the different parts and make sure it's at the right diameter. But outside the Lathe Dimple here, see these holes? Those are actually imperfections in the pour. So when they poured this thing in the foundry, there were bubbles in the iron. So all these holes like that, it makes the iron very weak. Now if that hole goes all the way through the shell, when they fire this thing, it would be instantaneous explosion inside the cannon barrel, and the cannon barrel would fly apart and kill all the crewmen. So this would have been a very dangerous shell had they fired it, because the flame could get right into the powder cavity, which is right here. Now if you look down in there, and unfortunately I don't have a flashlight, this is hollow on the inside. You can see that there's nothing in it. Now when I pulled the fuse out, there was powder in there, and I was able to just flush it out no problem. Let me show you something else that's pretty cool about this in detail. So I've showed you the sabot and the imperfections in the iron, but I'm going to show you something that's really interesting about these shells that you don't see on many shells. Look at that little symbol right there. This is actually a mark that they put on at the foundry. And you don't see these on shells very often. And every one of these bronze has that mark, which makes it much, much more valuable. Now, I don't know how valuable these things actually are, because again, the iron isn't real good and they're not the prettiest of shells, but they do have this foundry mark, which is really cool. And one other thing about the sabot here, you see how there are slots cut in it like that with a saw? The reason they did that is so that when they fired the cannon, this would be in the tube, the cannon tube, when they would fire it, the flames would be back here when the powder ignited, and they could get out these little slots right here, and the flames would go around the cannon, race around, and hit the fuse up here on this end, and the fuse would ignite and go off. And I'm going to show you a fuse now. This is what they look like. What I'm holding in my hand is actually a fuse adapter, okay? The fuse itself would be the powder train in the middle, and that was typically, on these types of wood fuses, was just something that was wrapped in paper. And what they would do is, with the fuse here, is that it would actually cut it to different lengths depending on how far away they wanted the shell to explode. Now this being dropped, this wasn't cut, but if you were firing at troops that were up close, you might cut this in half. And then what you would do, of course, is you put it into the shell like that. Now this would have been bigger. It's actually shrunk up some during the preservation process. But you would slide that down in there, tap it with a hammer, and fire it. When you fired this thing, the flames would come up around through that slot, around the edges of the shell, and they hit this black powder right here, which would slowly burn down into the inside, and the shell would explode. These were notoriously inefficient, though. A lot of them didn't go off. So that's just a quick rundown of these 10 shells that I found. I thought you guys might be interested in seeing them up close. I don't know, again, I don't know how much they were really worth. I said 1,000 in the video, but it's probably going to be a little bit less than that. But who knows, because like I said, they got some interesting parts there. But they didn't come out quite as good as I had hoped. And it depends. I mean, it just depends on what people want to give you for them. I mean, they might not want to give me $5 for them, so who knows. But again, I don't sell my finds, so I may never find out what they're actually worth. Thanks for checking out the video. We'll make some more. If you have any questions or want me to go into a further explanation about the different types of fuses and why some are spelled with an S and some with a Z, I'll tell you. Alright, thanks a lot for watching. For those of you that stuck around to the very end of the video, I just wanted to show you this real quick. This is my very first button of the year. I found it on January 1st. It's a Louisiana button from the Civil War. That's a pelican sitting on a nest feeding its babies. It's a really cool button and fairly rare, especially up in this area. And I'm hoping that it's a good sign of things to come this year, because I feel very, very fortunate and lucky to have found it. Isn't that cool? That's a beauty right there.